And then I'll start sharing my screen in a second. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this lovely day in March. At least it's lovely where I am here in California. We got some sun. And welcome you to kind of the first of a series. It's kind of going to be in and out over the next year, we think, where we're talking about digitization workflows that people have used for using a Symbiota portal or two. And so I'm excited to share about one of those today. And I know that there's a couple of members of the audience or of the participants who were actually part of this project too. So excited to share. But first, a few announcements. We'll just keep on reminding you that the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections meeting is at the end of May. And there is going to be a Symbiota-specific workshop at the end of that conference. So all the workshops are on Saturday of the conference. And it's going to be specifically kind of diving into some of the more detailed aspects of the Symbiota code and probably the schema, so like the database structure. Nothing necessarily like we're going to be looking at the code together, but more like, hey, I've noticed that my portal does this thing. Is there some reason that it does that? And we can talk about the limitations and the strengths that come from those. And we're open to questions or suggestions about things that people want to learn about more during that workshop. So if you're going to come, send us your, hey, I really want to hear about the geographic thesaurus questions. Happy to receive those. And then also mark your calendars for botany, which was previously scheduled for somewhere else, but now it is in Palm Springs, California. And that will be July 26th through 30th. And I believe both Lindsay and I will be there in person. So you could come find us at the booth, ask us your data questions, get some in-person help. We'll be there. And then an announcement from our side here at the Symbiota Support Hub is that we are currently beta testing the Symbiota 3.2 code. So this is going to be the next major release of our code, or I guess it's called a minor release because it's a 0.2. So that's going to come out in probably the next few weeks. And as you might remember from our previous code release, so we release the code and then it gets added to all of the portals that the Symbiota Support Hub manages kind of iteratively. So it might be a couple months after the release before you actually see 3.2 in your portal. But before that happens, we'll have probably a Symbiota support group meeting, if not an orientation meeting, so that we can walk through all the changes. They're not like super big changes, but there's some exciting new things that have been developed in this new code base. And Lindsay just put in the chat a link to an article about one of the kind of more major things that you're going to see in 3.2. Okay, so as I mentioned, today we are starting off a series about collaborative digitization projects using Symbiota portals. And today we're going to be showcasing the California Phenology Network. So these collaborative digitization projects that we're going to be referencing in this series are largely NSF-funded thematic collections networks. So back when the NSF started funding a lot of digitization, they did it kind of under the umbrella of iDigBio and under the umbrella of this ADBC program, which then funded these National Science Foundation grants to do collaborative digitization projects. So these folks would come together, a bunch of institutions, and say, hey, we're all going to work on digitizing this one specific type of collection or type of specimen. And we're going to use like similar protocols and kind of do it all together with a specific research aim. And so the California Phenology Network is one of those TCNs, thematic collections networks. So today, I'm not going to talk too much about that specific project. There's a lot of information you can find on their website. But I am going to talk through the specific workflows that they were using that involved Symbiota, hence it being in a Symbiota support group meeting. So specifically, I'm going to talk about the imaging workflow, the transcription strategies, and the georeferencing strategies that they used, many of which involve Symbiota because they used the one central portal. And I'll give a little bit of background. Actually, I'll share this link. You can follow along with what I'm going to be showing you on their project website. And when I say they, this is actually a group that involves me. Let's see if I can find that page. So the California Phenology Network was started in 2018. It was a 4-year project to digitize over 1 million herbarium specimens, so plant specimens, and get phenological data from them. So that means like flowering time, fruiting time. So this was a project led by Dr. Jen Yost at California Polytechnic, and then I was the project manager, and I also helped launch their Symbiota portal, which is called CCH2. And we had additional support from the University of California, Berkeley, from Jason Alexander. And then we had tons of excellent collaborators from all of these institutions. So this ended up being a collaboration of 28 institutions and all kind of working with generally the same workflow to try to get these plant specimens imaged and transcribed and georeferenced. So I put some links in the chat and you can follow along with these workflows as we go. Okay, so on the page that I just linked, you'll be able to see this workflow diagram. And this, give you the caveat, is the 2018/2019 version of that workflow diagram. And some of these things have changed with the technology and also with the code, actually. And also just kind of learning after time what is the most efficient. So I'll give you kind of what we did and then also what changes I would make now. Having been the project manager, what would I do a little bit differently? So the first thing that we did is we focused on a image first workflow. So we were trying to get everything imaged before we did the transcription and the georeferencing so that would speed things up and we could do things mostly in the e-space, in the internet, instead of having to have people physically in the collections all the time. This ended up being a very good strategy because little did we know in 2 years in 2020, we were going to not be able to go into our collections at all. So it was really advantageous for us to use this image first workflow. So what we did is we barcoded all of our specimens and then we imaged them. We imaged them in this imaging station setup where we had a light box that had a mount on it that was connected dynamically to our computer. And then we were able to enter data into the CCH2 portal concurrently or not concurrently with the image first workflow. We didn't do that at the very same time. But then we used a tethering software called Smart Shooter. And then we did our updates or our image modifications in Lightroom. And then we uploaded our data or our images to Cyverse, which used to host images, does not currently. So there's been a bunch of changes. Ordery no longer makes these light boxes, sorry to say. Cyverse no longer hosts herbarium images the same way that they used to. I think you can still set up an image hosting agreement with them, but that's not their specialty. They mostly focus on like advanced computing instead of just storage. And then Smart Shooter has been updated to Smart Shooter 4 since then. But actually, you don't really need a fancy tethering software. There are softwares that you can use that are kind of come with your camera that can be cheaper. The reason why we use this Smart Shooter 4 is because it had a function that allows you to, it would automatically scan the image for a barcode and then rename the record according to that barcode. But since then, we have found free software that will do that for you. So we don't need to use this smart shooter after all. And I can put some links in the chat about those tools. So we imaged all of our specimens in using this lightbox method. And then, oh yeah, Megan puts in the chat that the Canon EOS utility is the camera software that comes with Canons. And yeah, you can totally use that. When you have a way to do that auto naming your records or your images according to barcodes, then you can use whatever tethering software you want to. And tethering is just the connecting the camera to the computer. And it allows you to change like all the imaging settings, so like the aperture and the light balance and things like that, as well as being able to click a button on your computer to shoot the camera rather than having to like reach up and hit it, which might actually change your camera's position. So once we had our specimens imaged in a raw format, then we, in Adobe Lightroom, we edited those images. So we cropped them accordingly, changed some light balance so they would be a little bit brighter. And then we created a DNG version and also a JPEG version. Looking back, I would not do those DNGs anymore. So we would upload that JPEG to a place called Cyverse. I would not do those. Do that one DNG transformation step. I think the logic back then was that the DNGs were going to be a more stable format because the raw NEF files are CR2 files. Those are a proprietary file format, but kind of DNG is too. So it seems that since Canon and Nikon aren't going anywhere anytime soon, it seems, then those might be just as safe as DNGs, and that can avoid a whole step of having to convert them into another type of file. And then additionally, we no longer host our images with Cyverse, we being the herbaria in California. There are a number of ways that people manage their specimen images and get them online for viewing. Some of them have their own servers where they can put the images and they're still web accessible. And then I'm trying to think if there's many other than that. So it's mostly just institutional servers. And then most of us host our images with the Symbiota Support Hub now. So the Symbiota Support Hub has the ability to host images for you, just the JPEG versions so that they will be web accessible. And that new workflow is using Globus, which is basically like Dropbox. Like you just stick it up there and then it gets ingested by our protocols. One important thing to note through this whole workflow is that the images were named according to the barcodes. And that's important because then when they were going into the Symbiota portal CCH2 has those barcodes as catalog numbers. And so the image processing scripts can actually look at the name of the file, find the barcode, find the record in the portal that has that barcode, and then just link up that image. So you really have to be mindful when you are naming your images that you name them something that can be harvested or automatically linked to your specimen records in a digital way. Okay, I'm going to pause here and see if anyone has any questions about imaging, image hosting, image editing, loading, things like that. Questions or alternatives? This was just the way that we did it.
I have a question. It would be quicker to say it than type it.
Go for it.
Can you provide the links for the software that you mentioned, the image capturing software, the alternatives to Smart Shooter?
Yeah, it was not actually the software, the image tethering software. I don't have very much details about that. You'd probably just use like the Canon EOS utility or something like that. But the one that I do want to share with you is called, where is that? Is the is a software that will automatically scan your images and name them according to the barcodes. And that one can be found on
That might be
this
the one I
website.
have. Is that the one that it's a post-processing thing that it doesn't do it as you're taking the pictures? Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is called Barcode Renamer.
Okay. Thank you.
And I have gotten that to work on my machine before, and it was really slick.
Okay. Great.
Is that one, Katie, that works only on PC?
It might. That's a good, important point. Let's see. Megan asks, during barcoding, did you add any skeletal data? No, that's a key difference between our workflow and a lot of other TCNs is that we didn't, most of the collections, or at least most of the institutions, did not capture any data at the time of imaging. So I know that like the CERNEC TCN, they were putting in skeletal data, which is like the scientific name and some base locality information. But we decided not to do that because that significantly slows down the transcription, or not the transcription, the imaging. Although some of our institutions did decide to do that, it's kind of up to you. We noticed that you can really can't crank through images if you don't do that. Question from Bob. Do we need to notify anyone we are uploading to Globus, or is just doing so enough to get records ingested? So the first time that you try to put images into Globus, you won't have access to it. Like you'll need to email us and say, hey, I'd like to start hosting my images with you. And we'll have a conversation about that and any fees that might come up once you have like tons of images on there. And then once you have that whole workflow set up, we get an automated alert every morning that says, here are all of the folders that have images in them now that people uploaded yesterday. And then we process all those images, usually the next business day. So when you already have that folder, you don't need to send us an email or anything. Any other questions?
Um, Working with entering new fungal records, most of those are coming in via iNaturalist, which have images of the fresh specimens and sometimes the dried ones already in there. We're
Mm-hmm.
having space issues for photos. And so they asked us to leave those, and then they're linking to the iNaturalist from MycoPortal. So the only ones that are going to exist in MycoPortal itself are the photograph of this data entry or packet with the barcode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Your field photos can live on iNaturalist servers,
Right.
and then your other ones can be that you need for transcription and
Mhm.
data checking and stuff can
And
live.
Scott Bates helped us with making a spreadsheet for importing some of the record fields from iNaturalist into the MycoPortal, and then we
Nice.
put in the rest.
Yeah, yeah, you can make a saved import profile to do that
Mhm.
type of thing. Okay, so once we had uploaded our images into Cyverse, which got them linked into CCH2 via basically the same process as the Globus. It you gives you a log file just like the Cyverse one did, so that you can see what loaded in and what didn't. Then we needed to attach any of the records that were already in CCH2 um, to their images. So there was kind of a two-prong problem here. We had a bunch of images that had no data in the database, um, or a bunch of specimens that had no data in the database, and so they were just going to be brand new. Here's my catalog number. Here's my all my data. So when they got loaded in, CCH2 created a brand new record for them that was extremely skeletal. It was just a catalog number and an image. No problem. You can just transcribe those right away. It was a little bit more challenging for our collections who already had a part of their collection digitized, because as they were affixing these new barcodes, they could choose to do this in one of two ways. They could go into CCH2 and enter that barcode manually, or they could just say, here's my barcode, I'm imaging my specimen, and it's just going to create one of these skeletal records, like extremely skeletal records, and we're going to have to associate that with its data later. So this is a little bit of a complicated workflow thing to think about ahead of time if you're planning a digitization project, is how am I going to get my images batch linked to their specimen records if I'm applying a barcode, like a brand new barcode that's not the same thing as my previous catalog numbers, so like my previous accession numbers. Some people have chosen to approach this problem by getting barcodes that perfectly match their accession numbers, which sounds great until you realize that you have to go through a whole like catalog book of accession number barcodes to find the one to specifically stick onto your specimen. So it kind of just depends on where you want that labor to be. That labor could be in the matching your accession number barcode to your specimen, like having to look through a whole roll of stickers to find the right one to put on your specimen. Or it's later when you've applied this number to your specimen that isn't really found anywhere in your database quite yet, and you have to link those two numbers somehow. So the way that many of the collections chose to do this in the California Phenology Network is we just uploaded all the images and all of them made a new record the first time around. And then we would go through those images and use the built-in duplicate matching functions in CCH2 to try to find the data that is associated with that specimen or that should be associated with that specimen. And I'm hoping that I can walk you through this. So we created, let's see if I can copy this. Okay, not that one. We created a bunch of training videos on this, so you'll find this training video in that workflow document. And then I'm also going to just show you what that workflow looks like right here. So one collection that is still working through this whole thing is the University of California Los Angeles collection. They have a really great, big, historic collection, and a lot of those specimen records had already been transcribed, but they didn't know which ones had been transcribed just by looking at the image records. You could look at the image and see an accession number, and sometimes if it had a checkbox, you knew that it had data somewhere in the portal. But because you have this catalog number that the portal or that the original record doesn't have, those two catalog number and accession number records had to be merged. So I think I have an example for you here. If it hasn't already been merged, it's going to go in here. So this is what that workflow would look like. I have a skeletal record, and you can find these skeletal records because they have a processing status of unprocessed when they've been batch uploaded. So remember, all the portal knows about this record is that it has this name, and it has extracted that name of that image, and it's put it into the catalog number. But the way that these records were initially entered into CCH2, they were entered according to an accession number. And that accession number is a stamped number right here. So the protocol for this collection is to go in and look for the stamped accession number. And they were entered with the prefix LA. I'm going to say 206840. If I hit tab, it's going to automatically search for any duplicate catalog numbers because it doesn't generally want duplicate catalog numbers to exist. So it says, hey, a record using the same identifier already exists. Do you want to look at that record? I could say, okay. And then I see, oh, this is a duplicate alternate catalog number. Let's see if all these values are similar to what's on my label. So then I would look over at my label and I would compare that. So I have Eriogonum and Canum. That's what I have here. Monopass Trail, blah, blah, blah. So this is looking like the same record, 433, 433. And so then I could just merge these records. And then all of those data that were associated with the legacy other catalog number record would be merged into my skeletal record. And so we had folks, mostly students, go in and do this process while they were doing the transcription. So the transcription process was open up a record, enter in the accession number. If you find that accession number in a duplicate, merge the records, then move on. Because you don't have to do the full transcription for this specimen. You can just do this merging transcription. Yes, Allison.
Unmute. There we go. We've been doing this for another herbarium, and it turns out there's two specimens, and they both have the same other catalog number, and one of them got imaged, and then we're wondering what to do about the second one. Can we just put an A and then tie it to A, or does the barcode reader not like alphabetical?
I mean, once your image is already in the portal, you can change the catalog number of your specimen.
We're just wondering if we could image the second one as an A
I see.
Yeah, or whether
I
we
mean,
have to go ask them to create a new catalog number.
I think that you could probably just do it as an A, but put like an underscore. Usually that's how we say to add additional. Although, if you put an underscore, then it's going to just link to the first instance of that catalog number. So that might be a case where you just manually upload the image. Just be like, okay, this one's weird. I'm putting it manually into the portal.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okie doke. Well, let's keep on keeping on here. So that was our imaging workflow. And now I'm going to talk. Oh, Walter, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks. I want to go back a second on the tag name, the legacy catalog number. I guess we've talked about this before, I think, or I've talked with Lindsay, I can't remember. I just sort of wonder, why is the catalog number called a legacy number? I mean, it's still the catalog number. I mean, it is the catalog number for the object. And I guess, and I'm also wondering, tag name optional. It sure doesn't seem optional when that's brought in, as soon as we merge these records. I go through and delete that because I find it kind of annoying.
Yeah, you can always remove it.
But I guess maybe I'm reading optional being too literal. I'm just wondering why is that even thrown in there automatically?
I don't know, actually. I was not part of that decision making. But I assume it's because they want at least some sort of tag that is linked to that. So it's not just this random floating number, because it was a catalog number in the other specimen record, albeit an other catalog number. But yeah, you can always remove that
for the object. I mean, as a museum object, that is the catalog number. That's the official catalog number. It's not some random number. I mean, if anything, and then you've got the additional numbers being the image number, and I understand why you need that. Just wondering why we have to have a tag name.
You don't have to. You can remove it.
Isn't that pretty obvious what it's referring to?
Well, this actually differs largely among institutions what they use. So like a lot of the California institutions decided to just be like, That's a legacy accession number. We're never going to use that again because it's not machine readable on a specimen. So from now on, our catalog numbers are going to be the barcode numbers.
Oh, I see.
So I think it just differs among
Hmm.
herbaria.
Okay. Well, that actually kind of makes sense. I appreciate the explanation.
Yeah, and Katie might be familiar because at WVU, we have a difference between a collection as an occurrence, which receives the same, an accession number, versus an item, which gets barcoded and imaged. Usually they're one and the same, but in the instance where sometimes you have a mixed collection, so one sheet has two species on it, or sometimes a single occurrence event for whatever reason spans two sheets or more. Think of rubus with primocane and floricanes, or just palms, or anything big. And so those are what are kind of making us scratch our heads. And those are the instances where, like Allison asked, we are utilizing like A's and B's in the case of mixed specimens, and ones and twos in the case of multiple sheet specimens. And even worse, we have some things where a person went back to the exact same tree later on in the year. And so, in which case, we're doing spring, summer, and fall, just because that really is a different occurrence, given that it was a different date, but it's otherwise the exact same individual in the exact same spot by, yes, the same person. And anyway, I don't want to delve off into all those things, but that's just some examples.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different ways you can go about that. And Megan put in the chat what a lot of institutions in California decided to do. What we put in our best practices was for each sheet, like every sheet gets its own barcode. And if you have more than one specimen on your sheet, then it gets as many barcodes as it needs to match the number of specimens. But that gets really challenging in the case of like lichens, where you have 12 specimens on one packet. So yeah, it's kind of institutional. There's a lot of shared practices, but there's a bunch of different ways people are doing it. Deborah.
Hi. We oftentimes get mixed collections of mushroom fungi or one fungus growing on another one. But in terms of sorting, in our FileMaker Pro database, because they're numbers, we use a 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 so that we don't get mixed numbers and letters.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be helpful if the portal will support the decimal points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can have any sort of letters, numbers, symbols in your catalog numbers technically, so that should work fine. Just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything else. Yeah, and also, Walter, a point about other catalog numbers is um, we understand that you can't currently make any batch changes to those tag names, which is frustrating. Hopefully, we're going to be able to fix that in the future. But hopefully, in the future, you'll be able to just like find anything that says legacy catalog number if you don't want it, and then just batch remove it. But right now, we don't have that tool. Okay, back to our workflows here. So now I'm going to talk about transcription strategies. How on earth did we transcribe hundreds of thousands of herbarium specimen labels? We did a lot of things. So we had paid student technicians as part of the grant. We had students do this as part of an online course. We had volunteers do this. We had excuse me, a lot of volunteers do this as part of We Dig Bio events, which is the worldwide engagement for digitizing bio collections. If Lindsay, you could find that link to put in the chat, that'd be awesome. And we had a lot of our specimens transcribed on Notes from Nature, which is a citizen science or community science platform where you get an image on one side and all the fields that you need to enter on the other side, and it's a nice slick interface. And that worked out pretty well. Those don't always go very quickly, but you don't have to put in tons of effort to get those transcriptions. But if you're thinking about doing your stuff through Notes from Nature in the future, I think it's a great platform and it's a good way of getting a wide audience. But it does take a lot of work to set up and then also to get the data down and to quality check them. So usually it took me anywhere from like an hour to 5 hours to clean up a data set of like 2,000 records when it came out of Notes from Nature, which is faster than transcribing those all myself, but still does take some energy to do that transcription. So we had the students just working directly in CCH2 because a lot of our collections were live managed, which means that they do all their data editing right there in the portal. And one thing that we leveraged was the fact that you can have people who are not necessarily affiliated with your collection still making edits in your collection. So we had one person in our project managing, let's say it was like 20 students at a time, and those students had access to maybe 5 different collections worth of data, or maybe we just did one collection at a time. So we had one person doing that training via Zoom, and then we had them work in one specific collection, do a bunch of stuff. Maybe if we finished our targets there, we would move on to a different herbarium. So it was a nice way of being able to use that distributed access so that even though, maybe, Cal State LA is done with their transcriptions, but they have 5 students who are raring to go, we could say, oh, let's help out over here because Cal Poly needs help or UCLA needs help. So that was a nice use of those features. We did a bunch of outreach. So here's an example little poster from Notes from Nature outreach. So we had our Notes from Nature expedition live and had people come in from the outside and help us with that. If I were to do things differently, I think that I would make more use of the crowdsourcing tools in Symbiota portals. We didn't use that a lot, but that's kind of like a version of Notes from Nature that's not quite as slick and user-friendly, but it is a way that people can get involved and you don't have to necessarily do 3 transcriptions of every specimen. So in Notes from Nature, this is optional, but you can have multiple people transcribe each specimen and then it will reconcile any differences, which is recommended for such a widely used platform like Notes from Nature. But if you use the Symbiota crowdsourcing, it's usually a much smaller audience who are used to using crowdsourcing in these tools. So you can train up a smaller audience and hopefully have them contributing all together. And I'm sure if we have the global TCN, which is of bryophytes and lichens, talking in the future at one of these meetings, they'll be able to tell you more about crowdsourcing. Okay, I want to talk also about georeferencing strategies because we did some interesting and I think novel things for our georeferencing strategies. So we developed some pretty rigorous georeferencing training materials that I'm going to put in to the chat. So we developed kind of an online course that was just a series of 4 videos, and there were quizzes at the time, but the quiz module has been deprecated since on our website, so sadly those are gone. But we had training protocols, training manuals, and workflows so that people could really get well trained up front. And then we walk through training them kind of in person. Then you don't have to do the A through Z. You can have them do online the A through M, and then we cover the M through Z when we meet via Zoom. We did some really fun education and outreach where we had online courses. So the way that we did this is we had one person, me, was coordinating these courses. They were Introduction to Herbarium Digitization courses. And we would have students participate from a bunch of different universities. And the way we did this is that those students would enroll in research or independent study credits at their university, and then they would be taught centrally via Zoom in my class, or at least just by me. And so we would meet via Zoom, we would teach them some skills, and then we would practice those skills in Zoom. There were other things involved in this class. And eventually, if we had students that were kind of advanced enough, we would get them georeferencing. And that would be really fun to do as a group because we could say like, okay, we're going to get all of Inyo County done from this collection. And we would have a group goal. And then people could just open up their questions right there in Zoom. Be like, hey, has anyone found this particular pass? Does anyone know where this person was on this day? So that was actually a kind of a fun and interesting group project. We also had another more intense course, our phenological research course. I'm putting a link in the chat. And that was for more advanced students. And I think it was mostly Cal Poly students, but a couple of students from other institutions also joined and were able to do this research course where we had students choose a genus and they would go in and phenologically score and georeference all of the specimens or a genus or species. We tried to keep them, relatively reasonable size. And we would have them plot kind of climate versus phenology trends. And so that was doing some actual novel research by each of these students and also getting some georeferencing done because again, we could use that distributed model of these students from different institutions can be given editing access for any of these other institutions that agreed to it. So it was always, hey, I have this student who's studying Helianthus. Can they georeference the Helianthus for your collection in CCH2? And maybe they were like, yeah, we don't want to give them access to our whole database, but if you can send us a spreadsheet, we can upload that via the skeletal file uploader and then still get those georeferences into the portal. So multiple ways of doing that. This has been a really fun group. We started what we call the 100 Club. The purpose was to get 100 people in this club to do 1,000 specimens apiece. So that's how we were going to get 100,000 georeferences. I think several of them have been able to do this. I just put a link to kind of the description of the 100 Club in the chat. But I think we also have a volunteer section here. So these are some people who have volunteered or helped in the 100 Club. And the way we kept people engaged there is we recruited them from kind of a wide breadth. We invited people from California Native Plant Society, people who were botanists or retired botanists or semi-retired botanists. I don't know if botanists ever retire. But also some people who weren't even plant related. They were like, no, I just love staring at maps. And so we're like, great, can you stare at these maps and tell us where these specific places were? And we're using the distributed model of hey, we have these 3 experts who want to georeference. Can we give them editing rights in your collection? And they were kind of under my supervision, so I would train them, make sure that we're all meeting and using the same protocols. And then if the collection managers or the curators approved, then they could start georeferencing in those collections. And we still, even though this project is passed, we still meet every month for a social call to talk about the georeferences that they've been working on. They're just such fun people. I just keep on talking to them. A couple of other things that we did that I think might be super helpful for a broader group would be we used the script that I just put into the chat to batch convert township range sections into coordinates. Symbiota portals don't currently do that. The only way that you can do a conversion from township range section which is this US Public Land Survey thing. If you've ever seen like a T and an R and an S, that's what we're talking about. The only way you can do those conversions is if you put that data in a specific format and then click the geolocate button, and then it will try to put that point in the specific section of that township and range, and then it gives you the error radius. Well, because there are some scripts out there, or there's some lookup tables out there, Nelson Rios from Yale shared one for California with me. Then you can actually do that batch conversion and decide whether you want to keep those coordinates that are centroids of sections, which are usually, I think it's a mile across, if I remember correctly. So I just shared that script. It does involve some like specific downloads from your portal, but super useful if you have that data in some usable format or can get it into a usable format, because I know that's really common, especially with like Forest Service herbaria. Another thing we did is create a script that can harvest coordinates from duplicate specimens. So in Symbiota portals, you have the ability to link duplicate records, and duplicates are defined in Symbiota portals as the same collector, collector, number, and date. And so if all of those are the same among a bunch of collections, then specimens or records, then those are considered duplicates. Therefore, if you have multiple duplicates in a portal and someone georeferenced your duplicate, you might be able to harvest that georeference and not have to do that georeference yourself. So the script that we ran found all those linked duplicates using the existing tools and then pulled out any georeferences attached to those specimen records. And while this isn't like a magic bullet because you end up getting a file that looks like this, this is still a lot of data that you can use. So what you see here is a spreadsheet that has all of your catalog numbers that have some duplicate that has been georeferenced somewhere else. So if I use the handy dandy formatting tools to highlight my duplicate values, you'll see that I have a bunch of duplicates. So what this means is that there are 7 records besides my own that share this exact same collector number, and day. And there might be as many as 7 different georeferences for that specimen. So I still need to do the work of deciding which georeference I trust the most. So someone would have to go through this and be like, no, I don't like these ones. I'm not going to pull those in. Or, usually we do it based on like, okay, well, how big is my error radius? Like, how specific are my georeference remarks? Things like that. So that's a bunch of decisions you need to make that happen, but it's way easier to make that decision here than to georeference how many specimens we talking about. Maybe like 500 from scratch. So that's not, again, like I said, a magic bullet, like suddenly all of your specimens are going to be georeferenced, but it is a way of being able to very quickly pull a bunch of duplicate data from your consortium, your group. Like this is the reason why we have collaborative portals, is because there's a bunch of work that your colleagues have been doing that can be widely used and of use to a broader number of people. So we have like big dreams of someday making that a tool in the actual Symbiota portal. I'm not going to promise any dates on that, but we're really hoping that you can do that not through this outside script someday. Walter, question?
Yeah, thanks. A lot of the duplicate function, of course, you can do right now in Symbiota, and I use it all the time. It's really helpful. I think I was just going to mention, another option is to do a search instead of an exact search on the collector and the date or in the number. If you do the collector and the date, leave the number out, you can look for similar collections. I always call them events, but this, and you have to be careful to watch that, it's the same person that you're after. If it's a common last name or something, Jones or something. but you can still find things that were like 1, 2, 3 numbers off or something on the same date, the same place, or close enough.
Yeah.
You still have to make that judgment, but
Yeah.
it can be a real powerful tool. I always tell people, once something is entered into the system correctly once, it's there for everybody, across the
Yeah,
entire,
hopefully.
which really makes it very powerful. It and with experience, you start to recognize, people and institutions that are pretty trustworthy or that are very accurate in their mapping. And there's some I kind of avoid. Things I'd notice is if I see the uncertainty being some very exact number, I know that's based on georeference, the georeferencer tool, which is
Yeah.
prone to a lot of issues. Versus something that's got a rounded number. Or I really like it when people actually sort of sign. I noticed in the example you had Craig Freeman from Kansas. He's a really good mapper. If I see his stuff, my trust level goes up. There's certain
Yeah,
ones as you
exactly.
go through. RSA is real accurate. Reno's real accurate. Oregon State's real accurate. I'd like to think our stuff is pretty accurate. I mean, there's others. As you go through and notice stuff. I also notice that it's often if you're mapping something out of your area. I'm mapping something from Colorado, and I've got several options. Well, there's University of Colorado. Tend to give that a little more weight, figuring that somebody who is doing the mapping knows the geography of Colorado better than I do. And you still have
Yeah,
to watch
totally.
that stuff, but it's such a powerful tool to be able to build off of what other folks do and not have to constantly reinvent the wheel.
Totally. Yeah, I guess I should have mentioned that like the Symbiota duplicate matching tools were like pivotal for the whole thing because if you're just transcribing a record, you can click duplicates and it's going to search your whole portal for duplicates based off of these values here. And then if you can find either exact duplicates or even duplicates that are just same event, so like the, 20 this is 20. What if I found 21, 22, 23, and they were all in the same field? Like, well, great. Then I'll just transfer to empty fields and bring in all the locality data or the georeference data. You could preferably look at one that's like, ooh, I want that one because it has coordinates. And this is a bad example because these are different Hoovers than Betty, but you could find those exact or event duplicates.
Yeah, but you have to be careful, really to watch for that. And this is something that
Yep.
I think people should be cautious too with employing students or volunteers. And this is a skill position, this sort of thing. Unskilled things are taking the images, entering skeletal records, where it's just, the image number, the species name, the state, country, county, collector, collection number. That's pretty hard to make mistakes there. But when it really comes to actually doing the mapping or interpreting the mapping, I mean that's a real skill that I think you need to be cognizant that there are volunteers out there. I had one when I was at ASU who was really great. She was a retired chemist who just loved maps. Was really very focused on that. But a lot of students, bless their hearts, that's not their skill set. Or the other error people make is being super literal. It's the same error that computers make when we think AI is going to do all this stuff for us. It's 5 miles east of something. Botanists aren't taking a compass and walking exactly east. It's 5 miles ish. Based on the closest road, based on the closest trail. It's not. And yet there's folks who think, oh no, they they're going up and down over the country, following a compass bearing. It's like, and that's where I think it's helpful to have people who actually are botanists, who think like botanists, who think like collectors. And I think the same is probably true for entomologists and ornithologists, all the specialties. People who have some background as a field person generally are better at mapping and interpreting maps.
Yeah, it was definitely, you can definitely tell the difference between many students' things and what the 100 Club are doing, for example, because these are people who are like, have literally walked those trails at some point. But I think it underlines the importance of having really good training up front. So like those students that we trained in those courses, we trained them over the course of several weeks, and we would go back and look at their georeferences and give them feedback. That's a lot of work. Like we know that that's a lot of work. So But if you can put that investment in at the front end, you're going to get better quality on the back end. I see we're already at the hour. I guess since I have another meeting to jump to, we'll just leave the questions to hop into Symbiota docs or the repo, the discussions, or send us an email if you have any questions, or check out that capturingcaliforniasflowers.org website. A lot of it is a little bit out of date, but you can find newer protocols and workflows on our Symbiota docs, Symbiota documentation site. So thanks for coming, everyone. Nice to see you.